quote, close contact, unquote. But tariffs must be reduced, they say, to move forward with a deal. Meanwhile, tensions between the two governments are rising, with the Senate aiming to quickly approve a bill which punishes China for its oppression of the Uyghur Muslims, including putting them in concentration camps. We've been telling you about this story for over a year. This comes after President Trump recently signed a pair of bills condemning China's actions against pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. Joining us right now is research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, former White House and Pentagon staffer, Zach Cooper. Zach, it's good to have you on the program this morning. We've been waiting to see what kind of retaliation China would make to these bills, and the initial retaliation from China on that Hong Kong protesting bill wasn't so bad. They said you can't use our ports in Hong Kong. There are a lot of ports for the United States to park ships in. What kind of retaliation would you expect from this bill should this become into law as well against the Uyghur action?
Well, I think we're seeing Beijing try and leave the door open for the trade negotiations. They've tried not to go after the U.S. government. What they've done is actually go after think tanks in the United States, going after Freedom House, Human Rights Watch, all these think tanks that have been speaking up about the human rights abuses in Xinjiang and Hong Kong. And I think that's an effort to try and put some pressure on these think tanks, but also avoid putting any pressure on the administration while they're in the middle of these trade talks.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that if the United States is going to start, including China's behavior in terms of the way it treats its people, we're going to be in for a long and tough fight, because this is a culture, and it doesn't look like China's going to stop tracking its citizens anytime soon, or reversing course on the Uyghurs, by the way.
That's right, and this is sort of funny because the Chinese like to talk about non-interference in domestic affairs. They don't want anyone to be messing around in China's own business, but what they're doing here is quite clearly interference in American domestic affairs. They're trying to interfere in our laws, and they're interfering in what private American citizens are saying. We've seen this with the NBA, and now we're seeing it with these private think tanks.
Let me ask you a question, just from the perspective of an investor. Do you think it has or makes a lot of sense to get involved in a country's internal mandates and how they run their business and how they run their country, or just get a trade deal done? Because frankly, I don't know why we're telling the Chinese how to re-educate people or not, or get involved in Hong Kong. I'd rather just get a trade deal. And I think this is actually hurting our ability to close one quickly. What do you think?
There's no question that it's going to hurt our ability to close a trade deal, but my view is, look, if the Chinese have 1 to 2 million people in what are essentially detention camps, this is something that I just think we have to speak out on. We have to stand up for American values. That's one thing that has always made the United States have an important role around the world. And so I think we've got to stand up for these people, because if we don't do it, no one else will.
It's not hard to take a stand against concentration camps.
That's right.
Thank you, Tegan.
The problem is the whole world doesn't have to be like us. I mean, the truth is different jurisdictions have different policies, and it's none of our business sometimes. Get me a trade deal.
World War II wasn't our business?
Look, I'm just telling you, if they have a history of doing this to their people, it's not a good thing. But it's a distraction towards the ultimate goal of bringing them into,
There are conditions of doing business with us, and it's treating your people well and not keeping 2 million people in concentration camps.
You want to help those people get an economy towards democracy. That's how you help them.
That's not, the communist government is not going to hand those people freedoms because they get to trade with us and export goods into the United States. That's really clear.
A trade deal would help those people.
Look, the American people have to understand China's behavior, and I think that's also part of this. America is basically educating the world to China's behavior and how it treats its people.
It's true.
The human rights abuses and the theft. I mean, are you comfortable with China stealing intellectual property?
Every day the theft. For 15 years I've been getting screwed by China.
So do you want that covered in the trade deal, or do you just want market access?
I want market access and IP, and I want to be able to litigate on my IP within the Chinese market. 10 years ago I didn't care because there was no market to sell.
Well, they don't want that enforcement in the deal. So there you go. You still want a trade deal?
You can't bring these two mandates together. You can't tell a government how to control their people and get a trade deal at the same time. It'll never happen. So that's my point.
So do you want an enforcement in the deal? They said they don't want enforcement in there, and they don't want tariffs.
We have to have enforcement. Have to have it.
Okay.
Have to have it.
What about Huawei? Zach, what about this? Huawei is fighting back against FCC restrictions now on selling its equipment to rural U.S. carriers. The Chinese telecom giant claiming that the rule violates its due process rights by labeling the company as a national security threat. We know that there are backdoors in Huawei products, that the data goes right back to the Chinese government. How worried are you about national security issues?
I think it's very clear that the United States government has the ability to restrict this type of activity on national security grounds, but I also find it sort of hilarious that a Chinese company is complaining that the United States is trying to restrict Chinese technology company operations in the United States. What about Facebook in China? What about Google? What about Twitter? None of them have been allowed to operate in China. There's no legal recourse for them to try and do something in Beijing to force them to allow them to operate. So, Huawei wants to have its cake here and eat it too.
Yeah, that's true. They sure do. And the U.S. is onto them. By the way, in lieu of your remarks on the Uyghurs, what about Hong Kong? Should the U.S. fight back and support the protesters in Hong Kong, in your view?
You can't make the whole world be just like us. That doesn't work. The cost over the last 50 years of trying to police the entire globe has cost the American economy trillions of dollars. That's what Trump is against. That's why, finally, an administration
So we should just hold our nose and do a deal, even with the treatment of the Uyghurs, even with the treatment with the Hong Kongers?
What's different now is the whole world watches everything because of social media all the time. You can't hide
Except in China.
Yeah.
Look, it doesn't matter.
Except
that
in
news
China.
gets out. But my point
It
is...
doesn't, not in China. Try Googling Tiananmen Square when you're in Beijing. It's not going to happen.
It's a total distraction to say we're not going to go forward on a trade deal because you're doing something in a province in China we don't like. That makes no sense to me. That's a mistake.
Zach, final word.
At the end of the day, my view is just we have American values. There are things we care about. Democracy is one of them. Human rights is one of them. And if we don't speak out about these issues, no one else will.
That's true. Zach, good to see you this morning. Thanks very much.
Thanks for